Hi, so as I've been introduced, I'm from Humanly. You might not have heard of Humanly. Oh. There we go. But we are an award-winning design studio specialising in human-centred design for social impact. I'm Ali. I've got a really diverse background. I've been working in human-centred design since about 2015, but before that I've worked in education, fine art, all sorts of different areas. But I find that actually incredibly helpful in my current role because there is not a single experience that I've had in the past that I do not need to apply in my current role. What do we mean when we say we are a human-centred design studio for social impact? We mean that we work with organisations who share our aim to have a positive social impact, which means that a lot of the time we're working with local authorities, charities and international NGOs. So we work with any kind of organisation as long as they share our aim. We also work with a really diverse group of people, really wide range. We specialise in working with people who are considered vulnerable, so that means we've worked with a really wide range group of people, people with mental health difficulties, disabled people. We've worked a lot in adult social care, education, working with refugees. And we work on topics such as empowering women and girls, children's services, citizen engagement, climate change, a huge range of stuff. But today what I'm going to be talking about is some work that we specifically did with Macmillan. So we worked with Macmillan Cancer Support for 14 months, so it's quite a long project. And what we were doing was we were looking at the future of support and services for people living with cancer. We were looking 5 years into the future to the year 2022. And this was broad. This was all people living with all types of cancer, so really broad. So I will be focusing in today, don't worry. Because of the time available today, I'm going to be looking specifically at the prototyping phase, but we did follow, this is how we at Humanly present our process, which is it's based on the double diamond, but we show it as circles because obviously nothing's linear. So we have the research, the co-creation and the prototyping. Now, in this instance, we actually were fortunate enough to have 6 months on prototyping. And we prototyped 27 different prototypes with 70 people living with cancer in 12 different locations around the UK. Again, I'm not going to be covering all of that today. I'm going to be focusing on one idea. But as you can see, it was actually a really big range and a huge learning experience. Through this experience, we actually decided we needed to focus in a little bit more than on everybody living with every type of cancer, because it is huge. And the main reason for this was actually we decided to focus on working age people for a number of reasons. 1 in 3 people living with cancer is working age, so quite a big proportion. Also, the people who are younger than working age are really well catered for. There are organisations like the Teenage Cancer Trust, which have very specialist support and services. And the people who are older than working age tend to really appreciate the existing services. They like the face-to-face services. If you're not working, you're able usually to attend sort of face-to-face things that happen maybe during the working day. However, that working age group aren't necessarily able to access those services that exist. So they're a really big group, but they're underserved. It's also a growing group as well. So it's estimated that by 2030, there will be 1,150,000 people within that group. So the prototyping phase, we went through low, medium and high fidelity prototyping. And we really, in this instance, used it as an opportunity to test a huge range of ideas. We entered that prototyping phase with 10 concepts that we wanted to learn more about, find out if they were working, and we really, at the low fidelity stage, we really are talking quick and dirty prototypes. And it's genuinely about testing and failing fast, and if it fails, it really, at that stage, it's low risk, it's low cost, and it was quick. So through this process, we were able to move from 10 to then 5 ideas for the mid-fidelity prototyping, and we only took 3 through to the high-fidelity prototyping. Some of these other ideas actually were sort of picked up by other areas within Macmillan and were further explored that way, but for us, it was those 3 that we took forward. And the one that I'm going to be focusing on today is Mac, the AI companion. So Mac actually started out, as you may have seen in that prototyping diagram, as a symptom tracker. That was where we started. The concept was that people have got a huge amount of stuff going on. They often attend medical appointments where they're asked about what's happened since their last appointment, but can't necessarily recall it, certainly in terms of sort of numerically, has it been better, has it been worse, which symptoms have been better and worse. So the theory was, or the hypothesis was, that actually enabling people to track their symptoms in real time and either share them with kind of the people within their support network, including medical professionals, or even just being able to look back on them so that they were able to sort of refer to them in like medical appointments and things, that would be helpful. So we started with paper prototyping to find out, what were the symptoms that people would want to track, and also what methods, sort of what scales worked for people, and how it would work best. So we started with that, and we then moved on to clickable prototypes. So how might this actually work? And we were testing this with lots of different people. And we felt like we were getting somewhere. It was definitely, enough interest for us to continue with this, but we knew we really hadn't got to the kind of value proposition of it. We weren't quite there with like what we wanted to achieve, and we didn't feel like we'd got something that users were necessarily going to continue using on an ongoing basis. So we tried doing a live prototype. And to do this, in this instance, we used a combination of WhatsApp and Messenger. So we used existing technology, setting it up to look, so we had one account that all members of our team were able to access. We work in shifts to cover it so that we're responding as if we're, an automated service. We asked our testers for over 2 weeks. Our participants sent us their symptoms and a rating on a scale of 1 to 10 every day. And in response to that, we sent them information that we thought would be helpful. So links to other services, information about maybe relaxation exercises, all sorts of stuff. It wasn't actually that helpful for them. People found that it was overwhelming. We bombarded people with information. They didn't want it, actually. One of our participants just said, I just wasn't even reading it some days. It was just too much. However, what people did like was when there were the human touches. So if we said, if someone was having a bad day and we said, I'm really sorry to hear you're having a bad day, that's what they liked. And that was really interesting to us and made us really sort of think about what we were doing. At this point, we pivoted, and this was a huge pivot based on what we had been doing, which was very much, tracking symptoms, simply providing information. We pivoted to focus on the human or companionship element, and we went right the way back to paper prototyping. And this time we started prototyping how people might like that interaction to work. What made it feel human? What kind of responses did people want? From that, we then moved into, again, making clickable prototypes, and we tried once again having a live prototype. This time, we used a messaging service that we thought people wouldn't be familiar with. So we used Wired in this instance and got our participants to set up a Wired account to be able to be involved in it. And we set up a Mac Wired account. So again, we all had, members of our team all had access to the Mac account. On a shift pattern we worked, so there were always two of us. So obviously, you are working with vulnerable people. We had safeguarding procedures in place in case, we got messages that we needed to respond to on an urgent basis. We had all that backed up, and there were always two of us on shift working together. When I say on shift, we weren't like working all the time. Obviously, it was only if we got a message through that we needed to respond, but there were people ready to respond. And this is a team of 3 at this point, so I'm not talking a big team. So what we did this time, though, was we really, really focused on the human element. We talked about everything. We got pictures of our participants' dog swimming. We got information about what books people were reading. We were sending information about what games might be nice to play on a car journey to France. We were chatting, we were having conversations. Always as Mac. We had very different participants as well. We had one young person in their 30s living with cancer that was treatable but not curable. And then we had a participant who was in their 60s, who before this prototype had never even used an emoji. But he did learn during this prototype. And what we found from this prototype was amazing. It was one of the most successful prototypes we have ever run. We were concerned that people weren't going to want to open up to a computer, or what felt like a computer, wasn't a real person. Actually, what we found was that one of our participants said that if she could, she would have continued to use it every day for the rest of her life. Because for her, actually, sharing experiences with people in her life, her friends, her family, meant she was burdening them. And if she was talking to not a person, she knew she wasn't sort of passing that burden on. She didn't have to edit what she was saying. She didn't have to be careful about upsetting anybody. So for her, she wanted it to be fully automated. They did know, by the way, obviously we did tell them it was us. At the end, it was us. Mac was us. But even for the older guy in his 60s who had never used an emoji before, really enjoyed it. Felt like Mac was concerned for him and cared. So clearly we thought we were on something here, and people wanted to be using this. So we looked at we did a lot of work around existing companionship, AI companionship, and sort of mental health support. And we also found that actually what we'd found in our tiny small-scale prototyping, that people were able to be more open with a computer or an artificial person than a real person, had also been found in other studies. It wasn't just us. This was actually a phenomenon, which really helped us in terms of going, right, this isn't just a fluke. This is worth pursuing. So we looked at things like Wiser, Wobot, Replica to see how they were working and how successful they were being in terms of supporting people with quite complex issues. We applied a future casting approach, so looking at what was probable, plausible, and possible in the next 5 years. Speaking to experts, we soon realised that our ambition was really ambitious, and what we were looking at was just not possible in the current situation. We were asking, whereas existing kind of companionship or mental health apps are looking at one particular element, we were expecting Mac to be able to deal with mental health, to deal with everyday life. So, what are you reading, what are you watching, everything like that, and be a cancer expert. So, because we were also asking, occasionally we were asking for how are you feeling? How's this doing? Rate it on a 1 to 10. So we were still gathering that information, but in a much more human way. So we realised we are very much looking to 5 years in the future. Now, I have to say, Mac is not in development. Mac is kind of very much a concept, and we were fortunate enough to be working with an organisation that was really up for us experimenting and exploring things that were conceptual rather than actually buildable currently. So they're keeping a watching brief on like what might be possible in the future, but Mac is not currently in development. But I can share a video of what Mac looks like with you, I hope. So that was Mac.
We have a lot of questions.
Oh, really?
Yes. Right, so
I'll try to answer them.
Yeah, so we're slightly behind, but I'm going to try and run
Okay.
through because we've had
Okay.
a lot of upvotes and questions. So were there any concerns regarding people becoming too dependent on chatting to Mac?
Yes. We only ran the if it was a reality or during the prototype.
I think both. I think they're
Okay.
kind of asking
So,
during that and if it was to be developed.
During the prototype, not really, because we were incredibly clear from the outset. This is running for X number, like this is running for 10 days, and then it is over and it is just a prototype. So people knew that, and we were very clear about that. If it existed, that's something we discussed quite a lot. If it existed. there's always the possibility, I suppose, with all of the existing AI companions, but there wouldn't be, like, obviously it's only conceptual, but theoretically there wouldn't really be a time limit on it. And when we say people living with cancer, that includes people living with the consequences of cancer.
Right.
So we would see it as being, people could use it for as long as they needed to, and it wouldn't necessarily matter.
We also had people asking that, do you think the participants that you actually worked with would have had a different experience if it was AI and not humans?
Yes, because AI currently would not have been able to replicate that kind of interaction. We were doing way more than is currently possible, which is, you know, one of the reasons why we did it the way we did. So yeah, I think they would have had a very different experience.
Yeah. And finally, it's much as I say quickly, it's a really big question, but what do you think about the moral implications of replacing a human or human interactions that require kind of empathy with a computer?
Really great question. I suppose we saw it as not replacing. It was an alternative. So, and this was something we came across a lot actually during this project, was obviously the people accessing existing services are people generally who enjoy accessing those kind of services. So they enjoy face-to-face interaction, they enjoy group sessions. So we came across a lot of people who were concerned that we were going to design something digital and it would replace this. We were always very clear we were looking at additional options, we're not looking at replacing. So the fact is, you know, those services work brilliantly for the people they work with. They're great for people who like face-to-face, but there are people who are not comfortable with that or cannot access that. So for those people, it's offering an alternative. So I wouldn't see it as replacing. Yes. I'd see it as like an alternative or complementing.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. Really impactful, insightful work. So let's have a huge round of applause for Ali Fawkes. Thank you so much.